In 1932, the Australian military declared war, not on a foreign nation, but on emus. They sent soldiers with machine guns to the wheat fields of Western Australia. After weeks of combat, the emus won. The military retreated in humiliation. This isn't a joke. This is Australian history. For 2 centuries, this continent has been shaped not by human ambition, but by creatures Australians couldn't control. Rabbits forced the construction of a 3,256-kilometer fence, the longest in the world. Mice caused a prison to evacuate. Fire ants cost $390 billion. Camels, toads, cats, each one has rewritten the rules. This is the controversial truth nobody wants to admit. Australia's darkest decisions weren't made by humans in control. They were made by humans desperately trying to survive what they'd unleashed. Christmas Day, 1859, Thomas Austin, a wealthy landowner in Victoria, makes a decision that will change the continent forever. He releases 24 wild rabbits onto his property for hunting sport. The introduction of a few rabbits, he declares, could do little harm. Within 10 years, those 24 rabbits multiply into millions. Within 30 years, they reach the opposite side of the continent 1300 miles away. The fastest mammal expansion in recorded history. By the 1880s, Australia faces ecological collapse. Rabbits consume everything. Crops disappear overnight. Native vegetation vanishes. Sheep starve because the rabbits eat all the grass. The soil itself erodes from their burrowing. Farmers try everything: poison, traps, dynamiting warrens. Professional rabbiters kill thousands daily. It makes no difference. For every rabbit killed, 10 more appear. In 1887, the New South Wales government offers 2,500 equivalent to $3.9 million today for any method to exterminate them. Nobody can claim the prize, so Australia does something extraordinary, something desperate. In 1901, construction begins on a fence, not a farm fence, a continental barrier. The State Barrier Fence, originally called the Rabbit-Proof Fence, will stretch 1834 kilometers from the south coast to the northwest, longer than the distance from New York to Miami. The project costs $250 per kilometer for $200 per kilometer in today's money. It takes 6 years, 120 workers, 350 camels, and 210 horses. When completed in 1907, it's the longest unbroken fence in the world. But here's the devastating truth. By the time construction finishes, rabbits are already on the western side. The fence is obsolete before completion, so they build fence number 2, then fence number 3, over 3,256 kilometers of fencing crisscrossing the continent. The rabbits ignore them all. By 1950, Australia is losing. The rabbit population hits 600 million, 30 rabbits for every Australian. The government makes a final, desperate decision: biological warfare. They release myxomatosis, a virus that kills rabbits. Within 6 months, 90% of rabbits die. Success. Finally, except evolution doesn't stop. Within decades, resistance develops. By 1991, the population rebounds to 200,300 million. Today, those fences still stand, but they're not keeping out rabbits anymore. They're keeping out dingoes, foxes, emus, kangaroos. Australia spent a century building infrastructure to fight an enemy that won anyway. November 1932, Western Australia's wheat farmers face disaster. 20,000 emus have migrated from the interior, devouring crops worth millions. The farmers request military assistance, and incredibly, the government agrees. Enter Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery, armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The Great Emu War begins. It's a catastrophe. Emus, it turns out, are tactical geniuses. They scatter when fired upon. They outrun soldiers. They're too fast, too coordinated, and apparently unkillable. After the first engagement, soldiers fire thousands of rounds and kill fewer than a dozen birds. The emus learn to avoid gunfire. They post sentries. They split into small groups that are impossible to target effectively. One ornithologist later observed, if we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. After 6 weeks, the military withdraws. Casualties: humans, 0, emus, maybe 1,000, bullets used, 10,000, the emus win, the infrastructure response. More fences. The Agriculture Protection Board constructs emu-specific barriers in 1959, adapting the old rabbit fences with modifications to stop birds. But here's what's remarkable. Australia didn't just lose a military campaign to birds. The decision to even deploy the military reveals how powerless humans felt when wildlife controls your food supply. You send in the army. And still, decades later, emu migrations continue affecting agricultural planning across the country. June 2021, Wellington Correctional Centre in New South Wales makes an unprecedented decision. Total evacuation, 420 inmates, 200 staff, everyone out, the threat. Not a riot, not a fire, mice. The 2021 mouse plague is biblical in scale. Millions of rodents carpet the ground in rural New South Wales. They invade homes, chew through walls, bite hospital patients, strip fields in days. Dead mice contaminate drinking water. Living mice swarm supermarkets, taking food directly off shelves. At night, homeowners catch 500 to 600 mice in traps every single night. The prison evacuation happens because mice damage critical infrastructure, electrical systems, plumbing, structural integrity. Dead mice create health hazards. It's not safe for humans anymore. And here's the disturbing part. Mouse plagues have only ever occurred in two countries on Earth, China and Australia. Scientists don't fully understand why. The 2021 plague follows heavy rainfall after drought, the perfect conditions for plant growth, which feeds exponential mouse reproduction. Estimates suggest the plague causes $100 million in crop damage alone. This isn't the first. Mouse plagues hit Australia in the 1890s, 1917, 1932, 1984, 1993, 2011, and 2021. They're increasing in frequency and severity. The infrastructure response. Limited. Unlike rabbits, you can't fence out mice. Unlike emus, you can't scare them away. Poison causes environmental damage. Natural predators don't exist in sufficient numbers. So Australia adapts. Farms redesign grain storage. Homes are retrofitted with steel mesh. Agricultural calendars account for plague cycles. The mice don't. Just damage crops, they force long-term infrastructure redesign. Meanwhile, fire ants arrive. These invasive insects cost Australia $1.72 billion annually and counting. In January 2024, during Queensland floods, fire ants form living rafts to survive floating masses of stinging insects that outlive native species. The controversial reality: climate change hasn't just created more disasters, it's created more resilient pests that adapt faster than human infrastructure. Let's talk about the real cost. Since European settlement, invasive species have cost Australia $390 billion over 6 decades, $25 billion per year and growing. That's more than Australia spends annually on defense. 79 Australian species have gone extinct due to invasive animals and plants. More are critically endangered. The damage from invasive species exceeds habitat destruction and climate change combined. And here is the darkest part. Almost every invasive species was introduced intentionally by humans who thought they were in control. Cane toads. Introduced in 1935 to control beetles eating sugarcane. The toads couldn't climb sugarcane plants, so they couldn't reach the beetles. Now they're a thriving invasive species poisoning native wildlife, foxes. Imported for recreational hunting. Now they're devastating native bird populations, costing millions in control programs, feral cats. Former pets, now estimated to kill 377 million birds and 649 million reptiles annually. Camels? Used for desert exploration, then released. Nobody knows how many roam the interior. The infrastructure built to respond is staggering. The dingo fence, 5,600 kilometers long, the world's longest fence. The state barrier fence continues to be upgraded at costs of millions. Biological control programs, poison baiting campaigns, helicopter culling operations. Australia has become a case study in what happens when humans lose control of wildlife. Every major infrastructure decision for 2 centuries has been reactive, building defenses against creatures that were never supposed to be there. The Zero Report. Fighting plagues and predators warns that without urgent action, more unique Australian species will disappear by 2050. The problem isn't stabilizing, it's accelerating. For 200 years, we've told the story of Australia as human triumph. European settlement, agricultural expansion, infrastructure development, progress. But flip the lens. Look at what actually shaped those decisions. Rabbits dictated where fences were built, 3 to 5, 6 kilometers of them. Emus forced military deployment and agricultural redesign. Mice evacuated a prison. Fire ants cost billions. Cane toads poisoned ecosystems. Humans weren't in control. They were reacting. Every fence, every poison program, every failed military campaign tells the same story. Wildlife shaped Australia's darkest historical decisions by forcing humans to acknowledge they unleashed forces they couldn't stop. Thomas Austin released 24 rabbits for sport. The infrastructure response cost billions and failed. That's the controversial truth. The creatures won. They're still winning. And the question Australia faces now: what happens when climate change makes them even stronger?